Hey, you guys, this is Josh with Homesteading Family, and welcome to this week's episode of the Pantry Chat Food for Thought. Today, I've got an exciting guest, and we're going to be talking about ancient grains and regenerative agriculture. Whole lot of fun. Looking forward to bringing on Jade Koyle here in just a couple of minutes. But first, we got to say thanks to our sponsor for making this episode possible for you guys to hear and for me to hang out with Jade. And today's sponsor is Lehman's. If you've been around here long, if you've been hanging out with us, you know we love quality tools that last. And Lehman's has been supplying just that for generations, from USA-made hand tools to wood cook stoves, oil lamps, and a whole lot more. They've got what you need to live simply and sustainably. Now, we use their products in our homestead every single day, and I want you to check them out at lehmans.com. That's LEHMANS.com. Thanks, Lehmans, for making today's podcast possible. Now, our guest today is Jade Koyle. He's the president at Grand Teton Ancient Grains, which is a family-owned and operated farm and mill. They kind of do it all, and they're restoring ancient grains to the family dinner table. Jade's mission is to restore the finest organically grown ancient foods from around the world into our modern lifestyles. One of those ancient foods is einkorn. It's the most primitive wheat available on Earth. Now, einkorn contains a different type of gluten than modern wheat. As sixth-generation farmers, Jade and his family cultivate their farmland using proven organic and biological methods that actually build soil and pack nutrition in the foods that they grow. So excited to hang out with Jade today. You're going to love this conversation. So let's welcome Jade.
Good to be here, Josh.
And hey, we're going to talk regenerative agriculture, which I swim in regenerative agriculture quite a bit. Love it. Not quite on your level as far as farming, but I know nothing about ancient grains, though I'm super interested. I know our audience is. As a homesteader, it's actually something I want to get into in the next 6 years. My goal is to grow a little bit of my own grain. So I'm excited to just talk regenerative ag and ancient grains. And I know our audience is going to love to hear your story. So a couple other things I just was telling everybody about you, but you're a sixth-generation farmer, right?
Yes.
In Idaho. And before we got started, you were telling me a little bit about your childhood. And so let's just pick up the story there. How did you grow up, and what's the pathway from your growing up that led you kind of to this regenerative agriculture and ancient grains?
Well, like I said, I grew up on a farm in southern Idaho in the desert country. Although we're considered a desert here in Teton, we were really in a desert there in Gooding, Idaho, and covered in lava rock and sand. And it was a farm that my grandpa established and my dad took over, and we were fortunate as a family to work on that. I was one of 12 kids, third child, second son, and we relied on heavily to make this whole operation go. It was a lot of people aren't used to this, but here in the West we have to irrigate in order to grow crops all, right? I mean, it's a whole different life, and really that was a lot of the burden of our farm. I mean, growing, planting and harvesting, that was a part of it, but a lot of the labor is just the irrigation morning and night and taking care of that. So heavily involved in that, but of course, running equipment. And we were homeschooled as a family, which for me really meant that I was just working on the farm all day. So I say I was farm schooled because I got an amazing education in business and in science and biology and, finance, everything that you need to know to run a farm. I was right there with my parents learning that. And I think I got the very best education you possibly can, just working on the farm, learning how to take care of equipment, learn how to take care of my own motorbike, ride horses, take care of cattle, all of this. It was an amazing life. But at the same time, unfortunately, our family farm did not continue. As I started to get older, my dad recommended that I start looking at some other careers. He didn't see a future in it for us.
Wow.
And so I moved forward with it. I actually got into engineering. I took all my math classes, and I was behind all the other students when I started in college at the local college there. But by the time most of the kids my age were graduating, I was caught up with them in calculus and everything. And, I was more than adequately prepared to take on the college lifestyle. And more than anything, I was just excited to learn. It was so cool to just be able to learn these things. And, that enthusiasm carried on, and it still carries today, the love of learning that my parents taught me and they gave to me. And we had one of those homes where, my mom ran a garden, milled our own flour. We milked a cow. I milked the cow morning and night. And sometimes I trade off with the brothers, but a lot of times it ended up with me. Well, when I moved out, the milk cow left. They didn't have a milk cow anymore after that. That was my trading ground there.
Nobody else wanted to pick it up, huh?
But just one cow, it wasn't a big dairy or anything, just enough for the family. And that's the kind of home I grew up in, where it was very much homemade and a beautiful life. It couldn't have been better. And
that is, especially back then. Not a lot of people right in that season living that way. Not as many.
Yeah, we'd kind of moved away from it. And I just, my parents made great sacrifices to do this. My dad was actually in business and left that to go back to the family farm and get us on the farm. And it was a huge sacrifice to my mom, all the work with all the kids and all that. It was just amazing what the life they provided for us, but I loved it. And I really honor them for the good that they brought to all of our lives because of it. And, the cool thing is it carried on in our life. It prepared us for the things to come. I went into business and marketing and sales, and I got a lot of really good experience and grew up in a company. We went from 50 to 500 employees, and I had a team of 30 people working in the marketing department with me. And I was just learning, all of this business stuff on the go. And I unfortunately didn't get my college degree because this was just taking off, and you couldn't go to college and learn how to do online marketing. In the early 2000s, that's not how it worked. You learned on the job. And so, as you can imagine, that kind of swept me down the river, so to speak. And
so you went from farm to engineering to business and marketing.
Yeah, I got in this little company that just they kept moving me around, and they were growing, and they were moving me into different roles, and I just kind of grew at the company, and they believed in me.
Okay.
But it wasn't something that you could ever, I guess, prepare for per se, but it just worked out, and I feel like God helped me along the way to find my path forward. And in 2009, a friend of mine, we were at one of our kids' music recitals or something, and he said, Jade, there's this grain that I found about it. It's an ancient grain, and it's the most primitive form of wheat on earth. And he's like, nobody has this. I can't find this anywhere. It's not available. It's called einkorn, and my mind just caught a hold on this, and I was just fascinated by it.
So you're not farming at this point. You're doing your marketing. Got a white collar job,
right?
And you hear about ancient grains. Okay.
Yeah. And so I had no thoughts of farming again. It was not even in my purview to ever, although I wished I could. The way that we farmed growing up, I didn't see the path forward. But there was this guy locally that sold beans, because in Gooding, we could grow really nice pinot beans. And there's this guy who would take those beans and he packaged them in small bags, and he put it in his own packaging, and he shipped them all over. And I thought, that's a cool idea right there.
Direct marketed it. Yeah.
And it was very unusual back then, very hard to do, but he somehow pulled off some form of a business by doing that. And I just always remembered that. And as I thought of this einkorn thing, maybe this would be a way for me to get into farming again one day. It just kind of a thought, not a plan or anything, but for whatever reason, my little farmer brain just stuck on this. And I was at home, and I was researching this einkorn thing, and I found the domain name einkorn.com. That was a Saturday. That domain name einkorn.com was up for auction, and it closed that Monday. So I went in, I put a bid on einkorn.com, and I'm in this hectic job. So Monday comes, and I had just forgotten about it. I just wasn't even thinking about it. Noon on Monday, I had this idea, go check that domain. I go check it, and sure enough, I'd been outbid. And I raised my bid just a couple $100. I think I bought it for like $450 or something. And the I got home that night and I had won the auction for einkorn.com. So
You're like, all right, what do I do with this now?
yeah. So my friend and I, the one that told me about it, I said, well, why don't we just put up a blog and we'll just start, writing some stuff about it, researching it. He was studying chemical engineering, and he works at Intel now in manufacturing, and really smart guy. So he was good at researching and writing, and so the two of us together, we thought about things we could write about and research, and we put up a blog, and we were immediately contacted by people all over the world, researchers, people in the food industry, also, just health food enthusiasts that have kind of came on the same path that we were on.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, this is really something, this is more than I expected. And so we just continued on this path. And pretty soon we found out about a farmer in Germany that had some seed. And I found a translator. We didn't have Google Translate back then or any of those tools. Right. We got a translator to help us translate and communicate over email. And we were able to get some seed here. And we took that seed, we divided it in half. Some I planted on my dad's farm up in Gooding, and then some I found a farmer in Wyoming who could plant it. Well, the guy's farm in Wyoming, he lost all of it. He said he got nothing out of it. It just didn't grow. But on my dad's place, it did really well. It was beautiful. And I was the one that planted. I still have pictures of it, combined it and everything. It was just an acre, Yeah. Anyway, that was the start of it. And so again, I'm doing this on the side. This is not, I'd have no intentions of it being a full-time thing or becoming anything more than a hobby. And my dad was supportive and, willing to let me use the equipment.
So question, was this, like at this point, you're following this trail, basically. It's been laid before you, this pathway. Is it fascination with the ancient grain? Is it a health thing? Is it like, what's driving you besides the curiosity? What's driving you to put this energy into this?
Well, one is that my wife, Julie, and I were very health conscious. We always have been. And so the genetics of einkorn are interesting. It has a different type of gluten than modern wheat. It's the most primitive form of wheat on earth. So modern wheat has the A, B, and the D genome, but einkorn only has the AA genome. And so it's just genetically more simple. It has 14 chromosomes, whereas modern wheat has 42. So it's just a simpler wheat. And that idea really fascinated both of us from a health standpoint.
Right.
Not that we specifically had any allergies. My friend did. His family had some allergies. And so they were interested in it for those reasons. But ours was more general health. And then I thought it was fun to get my hands on some seed, to plant it on my dad's farm and see what it did. I just thought this is cool, right? So it was something that was just happening on the evenings and weekends, and we were just having some fun with it as we went along. But I started to realize that it was more than that there's actually a real need here to figure this out and put effort into it. And so it started to become a little bit more as time went on.
So you planted that acre, harvested it. I'm going to assume you go then and save most of that seed to replant?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then after that, I got two farmers to plant it for me, and it did really well for both of them. And both of them in Idaho, two Idaho farmers. My dad didn't farm. His farm wasn't organic. At the time, he was leasing it out to a neighbor who was actually transitioning it to organic. But this little corner was just an unfarmed piece that hadn't been farmed in a long time. So I took it and he took care of irrigating it, and it grew really tall. It was, about this tall. And
wow.
And so it caught people's attention driving by, of course. And it was just kind of a fascinating and fun project. But
was that hard to harvest with modern machinery? Isn't a lot of your machinery geared towards grain?
I used a John Deere 6600 combine. And me and my youngest brother, so I'm about 20 years older than him, combine that together. And he, it was just kind of this old combine that I ran as a kid. When I was a kid, it was it was like a Cadillac combine for me, because I'd been running an International 403. I remember we got that John Deere 6600 with air conditioning. It was so nice. And so to fire that old baby up again and to go, it was really nice. It's actually kind of like the way we combine einkorn is quite different than you would do like with hard red spring wheat or something, because we don't want to knock the einkorn out of the hull.
Right.
We leave it in the hull. Now, I didn't know that when I was running this. I was just, trying to break the heads down, break the kernels down, break the awns off. And I didn't really think about it much more than that. And so I ended up with more crack and more out of the hull. It wasn't an ideal cleaning experiment, but it worked fine for seed. It was no problem for seed. But the John Deere combine works fine, and most combines do work fine, but you do need to change the settings on them a bit. But you're going to, einkorn is not free threshing, so you're going to have this husk or hull on there that you can't get off with a combine. And we now, run an operation where we de-hull einkorn every day, and we have special equipment that we take it through to de-hull it. And okay. I'll get to explaining more of that depending how much time we have. But einkorn is a little bit of a beast. If you're going to grow an ancient grain, it's not the easiest one to start with because of that hull.
Interesting. Okay.
But it's also very resourceful grain. I mean, it was amazing what it did on this little corner without, it had basically a pasture. It was a pasture before, and he had torn it out, but man, it was a really beautiful crop that came off of that. And it just showed me the resourcefulness of einkorn, which obviously plays into regenerative practices. And I came to learn that there are actually 300 varieties of einkorn. Einkorn's like a separate species. If you take all 42 chromosome wheats, there are thousands of varieties, and you've got West bred, and you've got Cargill, and you've got whoever the seed breeders are managing their different seed breeds or whatever, right? Well, that's at the 42 chromosome level. Well, down at the einkorn level, the 14 chromosome level, there are no commercial varieties. But there are naturally selected varieties that have been gathered by the seed banks. There are 2 seed banks, and we're fortunate enough to have one of those seed banks not far from us in Aberdeen, Idaho. Okay. And so Aberdeen has collected these seeds over the decades. They even sent researchers out in the 40s and 50s to gather seeds from the mountains of Turkey and Iraq. And wow. I actually, they gave me the chance to order all of those einkorn seeds, and I have them here. And I 52? 350 300 different varieties of einkorn.
300 different varieties. Yeah. Okay.
Of domesticated. I think wild einkorn, I don't remember the count on wild. There's a wild einkorn, and there's a domesticated einkorn. Okay. And the domesticated einkorn, I've inspected every one of these, looked at them in terms of the seed size, color, shape, everything. That they're very different. They differ greatly, but they're all 14 chromosome seeds. Yeah. So anyway, I learned that I was working with a type of einkorn that was a winter variety, and there are spring varieties and winter varieties and facultative varieties that will work on either spring or winter. So
I had no idea. Yeah. I kind of thought einkorn was like a variety,
right.
One variety. So this is fascinating.
Yeah. And I think taxonomically, speaking to the genetics of it, that I actually had a professional taxonomist come and meet with me, inspect it in the field, and verify that it was einkorn. And he said, they've even played around with whether it should be under a separate subspecies or I don't know how the exact classification of taxonomy works, but not so closely related to wheat because of the difference in genes, but they've left it how it is, I guess. So,
yeah. Interesting. So you mentioned regenerative agriculture a moment. So let's dovetail the conversation a little bit about one. I mean, if you're into einkorn, then it makes sense to me that you're getting into regenerative ag, but you came from a past that wasn't necessarily regenerative ag. So how does that piece of the picture come together for you with the einkorn, with an ancient grain?
Well, our family moved back to Idaho, eastern Idaho, here where we live now, in 2011 and 12, and I was able to buy just a few acres around me here and plant einkorn here and transition this farm to organic. And while I started transitioning this farm to organic, I started to learn about regenerative ag. And, organic is a farming system that
Mm-hmm.
that isn't necessarily prescribed. There are basically do's and don'ts,
Right.
but it's not a prescribed method. So organic doesn't necessarily tell you how to achieve fertility, right?
Right.
And so that's where I found regenerative farming, is in trying to understand, well, what are my tools here for creating fertility in the soil as,
Mm-hmm.
as, as an organic farmer.
Any particular people that are your heroes that you learned from specifically that influenced you?
Yeah, there's a guy named Ken Hamilton, and
Okay.
he's from southern Idaho, northern Utah, and
Okay.
Ken is excellent at plant biology, soil biology,
Uh-huh.
and I don't even think he's an author. I don't even think he gets on podcasts, but the guy just knows it all way better than anybody I've
Yeah.
ever talked to.
Okay.
And Ken still sends me a bottle of honey every year, and his letter. He runs a company that helps people with regenerative ag.
Okay.
And all of his customers are not organic. Some are and some aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I came to him saying, can you consult with me and teach me about regenerative farming, but help me adapt it to as an organic farmer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I started to learn, and we started to make this microbial tea that he taught. We built this big, I think it's a 3,000-gallon brewer, where
Wow.
we take these perforated bags filled with humus, which is essentially
Basically a compost tea on a large scale. Right?
tea, exactly. And we'd put additives in it and everything. We'd brew this compost, and then we'd inject it into our irrigation system and put it on our crops. And
So basically a foliar spray.
Yes, but I was putting
it ground soaking it or something.
It was just going in with the irrigation into the pivot or the hand line, wheel lines or whatever. And so Ken taught me how to build this, and I was renting one of his systems at first. Anyway, I got to step back just a little bit. So in 2018, I was doing this so imagine we moved to Idaho in 2011. 2018, my wife and I are like, we've got to either do something with this or, because I was doing it on the side still, right? And it became a big resource.
Taking a lot of time, a lot of energy around the edges. Yeah.
she's like, this isn't a very good hobby. We need to change what we're doing with this here. Anyway, so I went to my younger brother, a brother 8 years younger than me, and he had his master's in mechanical engineering. We grew up on the farm together. And I said, I've got this thing here. Why don't you come up here, work with me, and we'll work as partners? And he made the big leap to do that, left his career in engineering. And
are you selling anything yet? You're not selling grain yet, or you are? You haven't started selling?
Yeah, I was selling grain. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So
yeah.
I was growing it and selling it from, from my personal abilities, right? So he wasn't meeting with me at all. But I was inviting him to say, hey, why don't we come up here and do this together? We can build a grain cleaning facility here. And I already had bought some equipment. Anyway, he came full time, and I continued to do it part time. So that took a lot of pressure off me. Yeah. And we started picking up a few more acres around here. So my farm was transitioned to organic by then, and we got a few other small fields. And then we were cleaning it and processing it and making flour out of it right here on my place. Mm-hmm. And anyway, that background's important because my brother has that background in mechanical engineering, was able to build all the machines to do all this stuff that I wasn't going to get done and couldn't have done on my own. And so he has, with my brother and I together, have been able to do this. Me focus more on, the soil fertility, the entirely organic regenerative processes and everything that we follow, working in concert with sales and marketing. And then he's bringing the more operational and engineering background to working as a team.
Yeah. That's a great team, and you get to do it with family.
Yeah.
I didn't expect this side of the story here of a homesteading family, larger family, you guys working together, and it's a really, really cool picture, and definitely inspiring to me, and I'm sure to all of our listeners. So dive into soil a little bit more. What does a regenerative farm look like? You talked about the compost tea. but what does soil management look like? Soil fertility? Because you're working on obviously a scale much larger than us as homesteaders. But what are the other components of that? What does that look
Yeah.
like for you? Are you tilling? Are you no-till? Are you intercropping? What are the other strategies that you utilize?
Yeah. So first of all, before we get into the specific things that we do, I like to think of regenerative farming as an aim. And when you have something as your aim, that means you're constantly pursuing it. You might be using different methods for pursuing it, but you're constantly pursuing that as an aim. And so that's the first thing to make it clear, is that regenerative farming is an aim for us. In other words, I don't think I will ever achieve perfection in regenerative farming. Sure. There will always be something that I am feeling like we can do better, or we want to try and test, especially as slow as it is to iterate in farming. Once a year, you get to try something new. So now we do have different fields. We're farming about 1,600 acres. And so we can transition between different things on different fields, but still we're limited. And so the way that we do it is, first of all, intercropping. So we have a crop rotation program that uses the dominant crop as what we would say is what we're growing that year, right? So, if I'm growing einkorn, it's not just einkorn. It's going to be einkorn with clover and alfalfa in it. And I'll talk about that in a minute here, what that looks like. Or if I'm growing Coruscant, it might be Coruscant, or last year was spelt with peas in it, right? So I'm intercropping at the same time, but that intercropping is happening in the context of a bigger crop rotation. So I might be 3 to 4 years of alfalfa, and then going to a predominantly grain rotation, but with legumes in there as well. And then, so that's the rotation and intercropping. And then the cover cropping is actually a newer thing for us. We have a really big challenge in this area to get cover crops in and established before the frost makes them dormant. And so last year we planted cover crops on our place for the first time, and we had mixed results. But our harvest starts about mid-August, and by the time we get our heads through that harvest and wrapped around getting cover crops in, it's second week of September, and we get a frost.
Yeah, I know it's hard, even for the home gardener. That's one of the things I've struggled with as a permaculturalist, and trying to help other people solve this is you just, especially in our climate, our shorter climate, it's very challenging to get that window.
It is very challenging. So one of the things we're working on is getting more efficient at getting the grains off and getting those seeds in fast.
Okay.
And so last year we did it, and I can see the fields where we did that. We had a field with peas, alfalfa, clover, and radish in it, and it was beautiful this spring. I mean, that was our best field.
Yeah.
There was another field where I planted the same thing, but it was just a few days behind. And days matter so much in this environment, and that field just didn't do as well. It wasn't as established. And so let's talk about these two fields. So in one of those fields, it was spelt and peas last year, and then we put this diverse cover crop in, and then this spring we tilled that field. So right before we planted, we went through, tilled it, terminated it, and planted in clover with Coruscant in it. Okay, so that field is underway, and it looks pretty good. There's a lot of weed pressure on it, but it's got that clover coming, and the Coruscant, it seems to me is our best looking field. And the fact that where it is in our crop rotation, I'm very impressed with how well those things helped last year. Now, we do foliar testing. So we're testing the actual plant matter throughout the year to see how well the nutrients are moving through that plant as it grows, and if it's able to maintain the nutritional profile throughout the year. If it is, then we're doing a good job of feeding those plants. So we're still waiting for some of those test results to come back from our first, or it'll be our second test to see how it compares to the first. But on the other place where we planted a cover crop mix and didn't get as well established, this spring we did a no-till plant into it. So it was einkorn last year. We put a cover crop mix into it, and then this spring we put einkorn with clover directly into that cover crop mix.
Okay.
no-till. So one was tilled and the other one wasn't tilled. And so we're looking at these side by side throughout the year to try to understand what effects they have on it. In the very early spring, the no-till one had more biological activity in it than the one that we tilled. But we got into a really dry period this spring where that no-till one just dried out hard and it turned really hard. And so I think we were not getting enough oxygen down in that soil, whereas the one that we manually tilled, it held up better at that point. And we don't get water in our canals and stuff here till later because we don't usually count on a really 80 degrees, in early April. But it happens, and sometimes that stuff happens. But fortunately, rains came, and now as I'm looking at it, that no-till one has, I think, a lot of promise to it. It's got a lot of different species in it. I've got some photos I uploaded for you. It's a very interesting comparison between these two in the biology and also just looking at, the number of species that are growing there.
Yeah.
And, part of it for us too, and this gives a lot of people anxiety, if you're a farmer, is not being so concerned about the look of a diverse mix, right? And so we have built a grain cleaning facility that can handle diversity. So so like if you go to a big mill and you bring in a truckload of, let's say, hard red spring wheat, and it's loaded up with all of this other junk in it, they're going to give you a look and they might even reject your load, right?
Yeah.
But with our facility, we know how we want to farm, and we know we're going to have some clover in there and some turnips in there and, all these different seeds, alfalfa seeds. We're going to have a lot of this kind of stuff in there. And we're building and even peas. Last year, we grew those peas with that spelt. We have systems where we can deal with that and essentially be supportive of the regenerative model. Wow. And so, it's stuff that we couldn't do if we didn't also run our own grain cleaning and mill facility.
Yeah, well, you guys are engineering. You're really pioneering some things. And I got so many questions, but they're going to segue us too far from the core subject at hand, because this is fascinating. And I want to come back around to einkorn specifically and the ancient grains. But before we do, one question on regenerative farming. In this case, you're rotating crops while interplanting. And so you've got periods of time where your fields are not in a grain producing crop, right? I assume. And so is that a marketable crop? Do you run animals through it, across it to build fertility, or what, or are those just kind of, fallow, I know it's not quite the right word, but are you just using them as a soil building kind of green manuring idea? Like what happens with those?
Right now, it's just green manure.
Okay.
And because of the growing season that we have, by the time that stuff matures, so if you get it in late August, you're not going to get a harvest off that. And so it's just going to be green manure. So a lot of our cover crops and intercropping is really looked at as an input cost. Yeah. Right. So we use a lot of compost on our place, but we can't use as much compost as we would like. So so it's a mix of this compost as well as crop rotation, intercropping, and cover crops. Yeah. The cover crops really just end up being green manure for us.
Sure.
Now, once you start getting into actually harvesting a crop, we're going to consider that a rotation. So, we have different crops that have different demands upon the soil, and so depending what that demand is, like for example, if it's a wheat, and it does matter what type of wheat, because some the ancient wheats tend to be more resourceful, but wheat in general will draw certain nutrients out of the soil and demand certain things of the soil, and so maybe first year in the rotation you could grow something that's super high in demand. In the second year, you bring back the plant population on the grain and increase the legume population and plant an ancient grain in there that doesn't demand as much nutrient as you might on the first year. There are these types of things, but there are complexities to it because you get volunteer the next year and you need to be able to separate things. And so if it's a hulled ancient grain, you can separate that from a free threshing grain. And so that's why we planted Coruscant behind the spelt and peas last year, Coruscant this year, because we can separate out that spelt if any volunteer comes up.
Yeah.
That's probably going into too much, but those kind of things are interplaying in all of this too.
Well, I think it's a really good picture. I mean, you're talking to a homesteading audience, so there's a lot of us that are trying to grow and raise a lot of our own food, do what we can, but none of us can do everything. And grains, particularly, are ones that most of us aren't doing.
Yeah.
And so we're still reliant on a good source. And you're really giving a good picture of what it takes to do it in an alternative method. And I hope people listening understand, how much is going into producing a product that we all can appreciate, that's on a scale that is, is survivable. You can run a business model that works. You can provide a good product for people, but it's not the industrial, non-organic, model. And that takes a lot of bravery. It takes a lot of resourcefulness. It takes a lot of innovativeness, all the things that you're doing to make this happen. So I think it's really cool for people to get to see and hear a little bit of this. And I think a lot of us can relate. I mean, you're talking about what we call companion planting, and you're just doing it on a different scale with a few different terms, but you're doing a lot of the same things we're trying to do, and a lot of our listeners are trying to do as homesteaders in produce our own food in a regenerative manner. So I think it's very, very cool. And we need you guys. We need you doing what you're doing. But to keep us moving, I do want to just hone back in on the ancient grains a little bit, and specifically around gluten sensitivity. This is a huge issue for people, and a lot of people today are coming over to something like einkorn or ancient grains because they're either having real allergies or some sort of sensitivities to modern grains. How do ancient grains fit into this conversation? And how do they solve some of that problem?
Yeah. So when we look at ancient grains, usually we're getting down into the genetics of it, right? So einkorn, like I mentioned earlier, is a 14 chromosome wheat. It has 14 chromosomes, 2 chromosomal pairs of the AA genome. Modern wheat has A, B, and D genomes in it. And so there are certain segments of the population, there have been some studies that have been published about this, that have gluten sensitivities to that D genome gluten. That it's something about the D genome. If you've ever heard of A2 milk, it's kind of the same type of an idea. Through natural, this isn't necessarily something that was done intentionally or even through breeding. It just happened naturally, through whatever means. This happened thousands of years ago, where modern wheat became crossed with these plants in the wild, and it began to introduce this D genome. So the gluten sensitivity thing is complex. This is just one possible factor. Another one is that people don't let their gut ever get empty, and they eventually develop irritable bowel syndrome. They're constantly overloading their body with too much food and too much sugar, and it basically rots the lining of their gut, and they develop irritable bowel syndrome. And go ahead.
No, you just said something that I've never heard. It's not about the grains. You said people don't let their gut get empty.
Yeah.
So short segue.
Okay.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm no doctor, but some people need a chance to heal this condition that they have in their gut. And that requires them to take the load off of their gut on a daily basis and even over a period of time, so that their gut can fully heal. And there are certain foods that can be difficult for that. And so some of those people, like you hear of people that have celiac disease. Well, you can not have celiac disease and have irritable bowel syndrome, and you need to stay off wheat. That's why I'm saying there's so much going on, different conditions. But if there's somebody with an irritable bowel syndrome, or they're having serious gut issues, one of the best ways to do it is to take a break, especially from any processed foods, even flour. Cut out all of these things while your gut heals. And you could eat whole grains. And when I talk about whole grains, I'm talking about using einkorn, for example, as a rice substitute, where you cook it and you're eating literally the whole grain. You're chewing that whole grain, and that is much easier on your gut than having, these foods that are super packed with a lot of calories, and they're hitting your bloodstream really hard, really quickly. And your body needs some time to digest all that food that's inside of you. If you immediately hit it before your gut's empty with another round, your gut's never going to get a chance to begin to recover.
Yeah.
And so, and these are some of the things people tell me. I hear a wide variety of different things people are going through. And so I don't necessarily understand all of them, but I do know that some people will come to me and say, I have celiac disease. Can I try this? And I say, you know what? We've had many people try it who had celiac disease. Some can tolerate it and some can't. So work with your doctor, make sure they know what you're doing, try it and see if it works. Then your body's probably at a point in that healing journey where you can begin to handle some of this stuff. And that's a big part of our market, really, is these people that have different sorts of gluten. They're in different parts of this gluten experience.
Yeah.
You know, and I think some of it too is that the foods that they're eating are toxic. You know, maybe, I mean, I can hardly even stand to eat most store-bought breads anymore, because it's just too much. There's so much of extra stuff in there that it just makes me sick. But, you know, if I have my wife's sourdough, ancient grain bread, she does a mix of, you know, einkorn, emmer, and Khorasan, sometimes with spelt in there. It's amazing. And my body likes that and handles it well. And if I ever need to get really serious about, you know, weight loss, or like in the winter, you know, it's different than in the summer, but I can cut back on things that overload my glycemic levels in my blood, and help me to manage and regulate my sugar by eating whole grains, you know, more as a rice substitute. And I love whole grains that way. It's nutritious, and your body can handle it much more easily.
Yeah. What, so the ancient grains can definitely, it sounds like you're seeing from kind of an analogous, if I'm saying that right, anecdotal perspective, you're definitely seeing that the ancient grains help some people that have gluten issues, just to put that, you know, for people that are listening. It's not necessarily just solves everybody's problem, but it does help a lot of people.
Yeah.
What would you say to people like ourselves? And I've got 11 kids, got a big family, raise the vast majority of our food, but grains we don't raise yet. I'm going to want to keep the conversation going with you, because like I said, 6 years or so is my goal to start raising some of our grains. But like, I love the idea of einkorn. Just having gone there, because none of us have sensitivities really that we've discovered. And do you see, what's the value you see for, you know, those of us that are out here? We want organic food, we want good quality food. We're not necessarily dealing with a gluten issue or an autoimmune or some of those things. Do you see an inherent value in that einkorn over some of the modern grains?
Yeah, einkorn is easier to digest. So, you know, just general digestion it's easier. And so, you know, that's one reason that people like it. Another one is the flavor. I would say flavor is the number one reason that people buy einkorn.
Okay.
And, you know, I don't know, maybe health related is number one. It's hard for me to know for sure, but it's a big one. Flavor is a big one. And then, you know, there are the other ancient grains as well, and they're not as primitive as einkorn. You know, Khorasan has 28 chromosomes, einkorn has 14. So Khorasan has been through an additional hybridization in the wild out there to form into, you know, maybe it crossed with a goat grass or something to form that. Emmer is the same. It's also a 28 chromosome wheat. Those fall under the durum class of wheats.
Amaranth is a wheat, technically.
Emmer. Sorry, not emmer.
Emmer. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Emmer. Yeah. I've heard of emmer. Yeah. Okay.
So if anybody ever buys farro, that's emmer. Although einkorn, emmer, and spelt are all considered types of farro, the most common is emmer for farro. And then spelt is the most modern of the ancient grains, but it has 42 chromosomes, just like modern wheat. So spelt and modern wheat, genetically speaking, are actually quite similar. But there are people that can tolerate spelt that can't have modern wheat. And so I don't understand, like I say, it's complex. I don't necessarily understand all the stuff going on there that would cause that. But spelt is easier to bake with than einkorn. It has a stronger gluten, you know, because it's more similar to modern wheat. It has a stronger gluten. You can bake a loaf that has a nice rise to it. You know, so some people really like spelt. Khorasan, it bakes similarly to einkorn. unless you're making a yeast bread, it actually is a little bit easier to bake with than einkorn. And Coruscant is really popular in Korea as a rice replacement. So a lot of people use that here, you know, in America as well. But Coruscant has a different flavor profile, and spelt. They all really do have different flavors to them. And so if you like to play around with flavors, they're all different. And depending what you're making, it can be exciting. If you're making a pasta or a bread or flatbread, you know, like we love to try. We love food in our family, so we like to just try using different grains in different ways, and it always changes things up. And you know, sometimes you'll have bread that's made with just regular hard red wheat, and the flavor's just not as appetizing, in my opinion, as it is when it's made with einkorn in it and Coruscant. So
I wonder, you know, when you get into the, I'm a beef guy and love beef, grass-fed beef, meat in general. But, you know, when people switch to some of these home-raised or more grass-based meats, at first for people, they'll call it gamey, they'll call it a lot of things. And I'm like, where you're at with the grain, I'm like, this is like great, flavorful, good. Now, you can raise it grass-fed where it's not good. It's not raised well. It's not done right. But in general, it's kind of that difference. You start to look at the other beef and it's just mild, bland, tasteless. So it sounds like kind of can be the same thing with the grains. As you develop a palate and a love for those grains, you grow into the richness of the flavors.
And it's happening on a few levels. So we are big, you know, when people order from us, most of the time they're a home baker. And we tell our home bakers the best way to use grains is to buy them as whole grains and mill them into flour yourself. You know, as a homesteader, it's like, of course, right? But there's so many people that still are buying a flour. And it's partially because if you go buy a loaf of bread from the store and then you bake a whole grain loaf that you've milled at home, you're introducing that truly fresh whole grain flavor profile to, you know, if you've been eating store-bought bread, it's a big transition.
Radical.
Radical. And so there's that going on. And then if you start baking with ancient grains on top of that, then you've got new flavors coming in. And so if you don't maybe if you don't have, you know, like I say, I grew up this way, but I do hear sometimes, you know, my wife will say, well, my husband doesn't like, you know, this. And so, you know, I'll say, well, we'll start maybe with 20% whole grain, you know, just start doing it a little bit. You're getting the benefit, some of the benefits nutritionally of that. Your sourdough will perform better by having some of that in there, but also you get to have some of that going into your, you know, your family's table. And then over time, they might get more adventurous too, to try new things. And there's definitely some things that bake better than others. You know, for example, if you're making a whole grain muffin versus something made out of white all-purpose flour, it's already turning darker anyway. Usually the muffin's going to be darker. And so doing a whole grain, it's a good way to introduce a whole grain muffin is a good way to introduce, you know, that to people, or a whole grain pancake. I mean, a pancake made from white flour to me is just disgusting. I can't even, you know, I just wouldn't even waste my time eating it. But
just quick, just kind of makes you shudder.
But a whole grain pancake, you know, it's delicious all on its own without, you know, with just butter and nothing on top of it. But you put, you know, a little bit of cream on top of it and maybe some peaches in August, and it's amazing. So,
man, sounds good.
Yeah.
I got one more question that's kind of a sideways, but for you, where does stewarding the land, regenerative farming, health, and faith come? Is faith a part of the picture for you in this conversation?
Yeah, you know, this spring, I was telling you about that dry period, and we didn't have water in the ditch yet. We had a whole bunch of seeds sitting in dry ground, and we were praying. And we living in the desert like we do, we rely on God for all of our water. We don't expect that rain's going to accomplish all of it. Fortunately, we have reservoirs here we can pull the water from. Now, I'm very fortunate to live right at the base of the Grand Teton Mountain Range, and that Teton River goes right through my farm, and it runs year round, and we get to pump water out of it. And it's such an amazing blessing to have that. all of this is because of God's design. The planet, and this amazing planet that stores water year round in the mountains in the form of snow and then sends it down a little bit at a time. In that aspect, faith, it's everything, and trusting that God will help us through, and there have been times when we've had hailstorms coming right at us and we've prayed that they would go around us, and they did. And, I'm not saying my neighbors weren't praying too. And so I don't take any credit for that, but I'm just thankful when I do miss a hailstorm right at harvest time. So, but we believe that God also, power sends us an unlimited power from the sun, and that power gives us the food we need, the energy that we need, and the life that we need to exist. And that he also sent his son, Jesus Christ, to sacrifice for us so that we can return to him. And through him, we can also have the bread of life, which is spiritual food that we need, and health and mind and body and soul to make it through this life and to endure the hardships of this life. And that he is our salvation, and only through him can we be saved. And through him, we can return to our Father when we just have faith in him and trust him and trust his plan and follow in his ways. He helps us through. His plan is designed to help us avoid a lot of hardship, and we just trust in his plan, and it's the best way to live. It's the source of joy and peace in this life and eternal life in the life to come.
Wow. Thanks for that testimony. Right there with you. And I think what's a beautiful picture is there's this spiritually, this grace under Christ, but God has left us grace in the natural world. And when we work with, coming around the regenerative perspective, when we work with what God's made, we're in a fallen world, but he's left us grace. And when we will, instead of trying to dominate everything and do everything in our own smarts and our own will, and we'll work with the way he made things, just like we try to do spiritually, right?
Yeah.
When we do that naturally, that's so powerful. And so it's a huge encouragement to me, and I'm sure to a lot of our listeners, to see you doing that on the scale and with what you're doing, stepping towards. We never get there. We never arrive perfectly. We won't in this age, but we can keep moving that direction and working closer in nature with him. So just wonderful testimony across the board in what you're doing. And I want to wrap up with, in a second, letting people know how they can find you guys and connect. But for folks wanting to get started baking or cooking with ancient grains, and I'm going to assume, like me, you may not be the baker in the house, but where do you recommend they begin? What's a good way, if this is resonating with them? Because what I do know is like just diving into some of these ancient grains and just trying to cook with them and grind and make bread can be a little bit challenging if you're just starting, or even if you've made bread and you just switch over. Yeah. So you have recommendations or what do you suggest?
Yeah, we love to support anybody on that journey you're talking about when they're just getting started, all the way through to an advanced baker that's trying to build up a storage of grains. We have pails for long-term storage, but they can start with just a small bag. And if they don't have a mill at home, they can start with one of our bags of einkorn flour. Our flour is freshly milled and shipped quickly. It has the date that it was milled printed on the bag, so when that came out of our mill. And so even if you're not buying, a whole bunch at a time, or you need to start with flour, start there. And don't feel like you have to make a beautiful loaf of bread. Start with a pancake. We have pancake recipes, muffin recipes. We all love to bake in our home. My wife's the best at it, but we all love to have our take at doing different things. My wife is out of town last week, and I made sourdough pizza, and it didn't turn out amazing, but we took a go at it, and we ate it. Sourdough bread, I enjoy it. I love baking. And so don't be afraid to just jump in and try it, but start with something easy like a pancake or a muffin. And then before you jump right into sourdough, whole grain einkorn bread, maybe start with a yeast bread. It's a little bit more forgiving. That a dry yeast packet packs a punch in terms of giving that bread some rise, and then, work into the sourdough thing a little bit at a time, and don't feel like you have to take it on all at once.
Yeah. Cool. Sounds like you guys have got some resources. Of course, Homesteading Family's got some resources, but I want you guys to go check out Grand Teton Ancient Grains at ancientgrains.com, right? Just like it sounds. You can also find them on Instagram, Facebook. And they've given you guys a discount. There's a 10% discount for the entire month of June. So thanks, Jade, for that. You want to use coupon code Homesteading Family. Pretty straightforward. And they'll help you get started. So you guys go check that out. Jade, any other way that people connect with you, or anything else you want to leave people with before we go?
We pride ourselves on customer service, so they can call us, they can email us, they can text the number on our website. We want to help people. And, we can't do what we do unless people like you, Josh, are helping to educate people about it. You're the educators and the teachers, and giving people the confidence to move forward. And we appreciate what you're doing to help people to bridge that gap. It's such an important thing today, that we don't lose these skills and abilities that we've been pioneered by ancestors. And so, I always tell people that, our first focus is the home consumer, and that is our business. So the cleanliness of our grains, everything is designed, the packaging and the experience is designed around making a good experience for you at home. So if there's anything we can do to help with that, just let us know. But we're thankful to be able to be part of this and be doing what we're doing now. Who would have expected we'd be where we are doing this today? Once you hear my story, you can see why that's such a surprise, but we're very blessed to be doing it.
Oh man, amazing journey. Thanks for sharing it with us. You guys go get familiar with Jade and Grand Teton Ancient Grains. Let us know how it goes. Post a picture of something you make. And thanks again, Jade, for hanging out with us today. Thanks for everybody watching and listening. And we will see you next week.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
Thank you, Josh. God bless. Take care.